I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs say it's not comfortable at all, and you have all sorts of like fears and self consciousness. I went through all of those things. Luckily, I had a supportive wife, I had a supportive family, and generally speaking, on the other side of it, like I feel like I am confident in my own abilities, and I was confident in my experience, so I was able to have enough of that to give it a go. But, I'd say it's 50-50, right? It's 50% feeling great about yourself and going for it. It's 50% like fear and imposter syndrome and all of those, terrible things that come with entrepreneurship.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Day One Diaries, the podcast that will tell you the truth behind starting your own business. The good days, the not so good days, and all the messy stuff in between. Today's guest is Shiv Gupta. Shiv is the founder of a company called U of Digital. They provide trainings to the advertising industry. Now, there was so many great insights from this conversation, but two things really stood out to me. First of all, Shiv talked about those early days in the business where you just want to get going, and the temptation is to say yes to everybody. Yeah, I can give this training. Yeah, I know about that. And then you go and research. But actually, he talked about the importance of zeroing in on the thing he knew he was there to solve. Solve for that problem and build from there. Now, the second thing was a concept that was new to me: fire yourself often, which is the title of the episode. But Shiv talked about that entrepreneur's mindset, that you should be thinking about what it is you're delivering for the business and how can you not be doing that next year. It opened up so many conversations about how you think about hiring or technology that you should use. And you can see the growth of U of Digital against that mindset. Folks, I really enjoyed this conversation and I hope you enjoy listening to it. You will certainly get a buzz from Shiv's energy. If you want more of these, remember to hit subscribe because we will drop a new episode of Day One Diaries every 2 weeks. Enjoy! Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your business?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. First of all, thanks for having me on. Thrilled to be here and talk a little bit with you about building a business. So my background, I've been in the advertising space my entire career. I started my I started my career at a company called AOL, which I would hope a lot of folks are familiar with. I was there for about 10 years. I started in operations. I moved into sales. I was in sales leadership. Then I was at a company called Criteo for a bit, also in sales leadership. And then in 2018, I launched U of Digital. So that is my business, my company, me and my team's company. And our goal, our vision is to educate the digital advertising ecosystem. I kind of recognized when I started the company that there's a lot of knowledge gaps or like pockets of knowledge across the space, depending on who you are, what your experience is, what company you work at. But people don't typically talk the same language. There's a lot of asymmetry in that knowledge, and that prevents progress, right? That prevents people from making progress individually. That prevents companies from making progress, and that prevents the industry from making progress. So our thesis at U of Digital at a high level is if we can help folks get to a level playing field, we can elevate the level of knowledge and discourse, everyone will be better off. So that is a very high level kind of overview of U of Digital.
Got it. Got it. And are the people you're training then, are you training them for things that they will be working on or just they should know about, or this could potentially be a disruptor to their business, or do you just leave it up to them as to what they need?
Yeah, so great question. I think we kind of focus on a few different core use cases for our offering. So one example would just be like space is moving really fast. We have to keep up, right? And so when we work with some partners, like one of our big partners is Yahoo, right? And we're training Yahoo all the time on the latest and the greatest in the ad tech space, even though they are a leader in ad tech. And
Mm,
the value prop there is just, again, like the space moves so fast. If you're at the company, you're just so focused on the things you're trying to do on a day-to-day basis. You're focused on your customers. How can you keep up with all the noise that's outside? You can't, right? And you need to, especially if you're a commercial person, you need to keep up with all those things to be able to do your job effectively. And so we're coming in and kind of solving that problem, let's say for them. Now, there are other examples where we work with companies today that let's say are like more traditional digital media companies or even just traditional media companies. And they have to modernize their entire business for the evolution towards digital, right? And that is a Herculean effort that they're not equipped to necessarily do internally. And they're not going to just, fire all their people and bring in, all new people. And so how do you do that? Right. So for that use case, we're modernizing a workforce from, let's say, traditional media to digital media. Another use case is when companies are trying to evolve their product, right, and move into new adjacent areas, let's say. So one example is like CTV, right? CTV has taken the industry by storm in the last 5 to 10 years. It's obviously where the puck is going in terms of television, but a lot of companies, again, like maybe they're traditional ad tech companies, right? Or maybe they're like just traditional banner companies, right? Or DSPs or whatever. And they don't know CTV. They don't know the world of television, and it's adjacent to what they do today. And so they have to kind of like get their teams talking about that new adjacent area in a very sophisticated way in order to commercialize their product effectively, right? So that is another example of a use case. So as you can see, we're kind of like focused on a few different use cases for different types of companies.
When you talk about it first, it sounds niche, but it only takes like a couple of paragraphs, like a couple of minutes conversation to realize, man, there's a whole Pandora's box that can open here. And as you're just before you mentioned it, I was going to bring up the connected TV example because as you mentioned, I worked at Google for so long, and I you're right, you're completely ingrained and engrossed in your own products, and you need to know every single inch of them, and you need to be able to convince your clients how it works. It will work, get it working. You need to know every inch of it. And then when it comes to someone else's version of it or someone else's competing product, there's simply no space and time
Yeah.
to be able to spend and understand that as well. And so I think that's a huge use case. But the one that you mentioned here, like I would have known the YouTube products very well. But YouTube now is moving towards connected TV, and that is bringing it into a different world to try and sell that, to try and understand how the ads can work. And that's a branch and a different way. And you can, perhaps the internal teams need to learn that and teach everyone about it. But bringing in someone like yourselves, and your model, I know, is bring in experts from the industry to teach. And I think that's a really interesting direction to have found, and not one that everyone would have gone for. But before we spend all day talking about the current thing, I do want to take you back because before you did this, now you mentioned you were at Criteo just before, but previously you were at AOL. So that was back when internet ads were done on typewriters, right?
Well, I'm not that old. So I was actually like, it's funny. I actually joined AOL probably when it was at its lowest point. So
Wow.
like, AOL obviously was, one of the original massive web companies, got everyone in America on the internet, hence the name. And then, it like had this precipitous decline after the merger with Time Warner, where, new companies like Google came in and just kind of ate up a lot of its market share, and broadband really killed AOL. And so, I started there in 2007. So in
Oh, okay.
2007, again, it was kind of a low point for the company. It didn't really have a direction. It was kind of going through a lot of turnover in executive management. And I actually did not even join AOL proper. I joined a subsidiary called advertising.com, which had been bought by AOL 2 years prior in 2005. And advertising.com was like this awesome, fun startup. And ad.com, in a weird way, kind of set the course for like what AOL then became afterwards once Tim Armstrong came over, right? So AOL hired Tim Armstrong from Google in, I think, 2009. Then Tim turned the company around, right? So I was part of that, like, we're in the dumps, but I actually work for a really cool subsidiary that is like the cool company within AOL, the one good thing AOL has done in the last few years. And now all of a sudden Tim Armstrong comes in and he runs with that and turns the company around. So I was there for a pretty cool period. Yeah.
So you were the sort of the subsidiary that became more the center of it all, and then you moved around the industry a little bit and ended up getting into Criteo and moving up the vertically in Criteo. Yeah.
It's honestly had a simpler path than that. I was at AOL for 10 years. I did a lot of different roles within AOL. Originally I was ad.com. I moved out of ad.com and I was part of the broader AOL umbrella by the end of my time there. And then I went straight to Criteo as a sales executive. And I was there for a couple of years before starting Youth Digital.
Gotcha. Well, you probably don't even realize this, but I think around that time I was specializing in a competitor product at Google in dynamic remarketing. So
Oh
you and I
yeah.
were sworn enemies for a time, even though we never knew each other.
Yes, we were. Yes, Google was our biggest competitor. It was constantly like, well, how do you compare against Google's dynamic retargeting? So yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that
But
was
now we
us.
like
Yeah.
each other, Brian. Now we like each other.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. See, so it was while you were there that you started to decide, or you started to think about this training company. How did that sort of kick off in your mind?
Yeah. So Criteo was an extremely interesting experience for me because I went from AOL had this very kind of like open culture, right? Where it was all about like, having knowledge of what was going on in the ecosystem, having knowledge of like all the things that are changing, being a very collaborative environment, being able to call up Tim Armstrong if you want to and have a chat with him, like very open environment. Criteo was a little different culturally. Like, first of all, a very French company. So a lot of leadership is based in France. So we felt pretty removed here in America. And then also like one thing that frustrated me a lot about Criteo was the products were awesome. Like it was a very strong product. It performed extremely well. Marketers and clients like loved the outcomes that Criteo was able to drive. But what was frustrating to me, especially as a sales leader and especially coming from AOL, is it was a very inward facing culture, right?
Mm,
So, I came from AOL and I'm like trying to tell folks like, hey, there's a whole world out there, right? And we're actually competing then more. We're competing versus more than just Google's dynamic retargeting. Like
right.
we're
Yeah.
losing money to these new companies like the Trade Desk, right? Who are doing things a little differently. Like we need to be talking about our products in more like programmatic ways and how people buy programmatic advertising instead of just this is how people buy search, right? Like we need to open up our aperture. We need to increase our TAM. We need to sell into different verticals. And I think like the culture was very resistant to that. That experience for me at Criteo was a little frustrating because I was like, if we could just have a little bit more of an aperture into what's happening outside, we would be doing a better job of commercializing Criteo, right?
Yeah.
And I saw it over and over again. I even saw it at AOL, and I felt like there was a need at companies to just have more insight into what's happening outside their four walls. Especially because like internal L&D teams can be really awesome and really great, but they also sit within those four walls, right? So they only kind of know what's going on in that ecosystem. They do great at like product training and positioning training, but you can only know so much about how the outside world is moving and how they're talking about you and the competitive set. And I thought like, hey, there's a huge opportunity for an objective, kind of agnostic external provider to help folks at these companies learn about the world.
Nice one. I couldn't agree more. And it's like you said, it's through no fault of the people, but there's only so much you can see from your own windows. And there is a world out there that really opens up, and it does change your perceptions. It changes the way you think about what you're doing, what you're selling, etc. So when then the idea came to go out and start this training company, how comfortable, confident were you before you actually made the move?
I mean, I'm pretty sure, I don't know, maybe not every entrepreneur, but I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs say it's not comfortable at all. And you have all sorts of like fears and self-consciousness and imposter syndrome and all of those things. And so I went through all of those things. Luckily I had a supportive wife, I had a supportive family. Luckily I had like the luxury of a little bit of a runway, not a huge runway, but a little bit of a runway. And generally speaking, on the other side of it, like I feel like I am confident in my own abilities and I was confident in my experience. So I was able to have enough of that to give it a go. But I'd say it's 50-50, right? It's 50% feeling great about yourself and going for it. It's 50% like fear and imposter syndrome and all of those, terrible things that come with entrepreneurship.
Yeah, yeah. And so then when you decided to make the move, hand in your notice at Criteo, and you're starting off You Have Digital, Day One Diaries, like how did you get started? What did you do first?
Yeah, so I think so I went through like first of all, I went through like a little bit of a personal journey, right? So uh I actually got laid off. So I got let go from
Oh, okay.
Criteo. And I think that's like a kick in the pants. Now when people come and tell me like I got laid off, obviously there's empathy, there's like
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But then there's also like, hey, it's a huge opportunity, right? And it's an opportunity to reset yourself. It's a motivational thing, right? And so I felt those things. And I went through a little bit of a personal journey of like, what do I love? What do I want to be doing more regularly? Um, where do I think there are needs in a market that I know well? And can I combine those 2 things, right? Pretty simple. And so I realized I have a love for teaching and education. I had a lot of opportunities to teach while I was at those companies. I taught, I always loved to like kind of help kids. When I was growing up, I really loved like tutoring. I tutored homeless kids in LA and in Baltimore. So like I always loved teaching. And then when I was at AOL and Criteo, like the marketing team would pick me as the guy to go speak at a university about ed tech, and I would love that. I was always like the guy to raise my hand to like, give the crash course at new hire boot camp, like, so I just love doing those things. And I was like, okay, well, that's something I love. Let me like do that for my career. And then the other part of it is kind of what I walked you through of like, I thought there was a huge need in the market, especially for salespeople to get smarter about what's happening outside their 4 walls. So the other thing, to specifically answer your question, like after I went through that personal journey and kind of identified what I was passionate about, what I wanted to do, I really kind of dialed in on focus. And what I mean by that is like if I wanted to start something literally without a product, I didn't have a product and I didn't actually even have a pedigree, right? So I went off and I tried to do a couple things. One is because I wasn't building tech, right? I was building a services business.
Mm,
I needed credibility and pedigree. So I went out and I basically solicited a lot of universities. And I was like, listen, I'm an exec from the ad tech space. Let me be a guest speaker, right? Or let me build a course. People at universities don't know the first thing about ad tech, right? So, I became a guest lecturer at UCLA, UC Davis, San Francisco State University. I also became an adjunct professor at Santa Clara University. They
wow.
asked me to build a whole course for their MBA program about ad tech. So that was extremely rewarding and earned me credibility. The other
Yeah.
thing I did was, again, back to the idea of focus, right? So I advise any entrepreneur when you're starting out to have an extreme amount of focus about what you're doing and for whom, like what problem you're solving in a very specific way. And so basically, I was like, okay, I'm only going to do training about ad tech. I'm
Hmm.
not gonna do soft skills training, only about the concepts in the industry tech, right? I'm only gonna focus on the tech vendors and the media vendors. I'm only gonna focus on salespeople and commercial people. That's it. I'm not doing anything else.
Right.
And so that I think that amount of focus really helped me like tell a clear story when I was pitching originally. And it helped also differentiate me, right? Because people were immediately asking me, like, oh, that's really interesting. I actually think that is a problem that we have. Who else does this, Shiv? Because you sound like you're kind of new doing this. And I was like, I am new, but there's no one else really solving this problem as specifically and as thoughtfully as I am, And so
Right.
I think that helped me get some traction. And I advise, again, any entrepreneur, the more focus and specificity you have initially, the more of an opportunity you have to just differentiate, even though if you don't have a body of work, you can differentiate yourself and get traction, right? And then you can start kind of like branching out and growing from there.
And in those early days, did you have people requesting and asking, could you put together a program on like soft skills, on leadership and performance management or whatever those things are? And you were in a
100%.
place to say, no, I'm not doing that.
100%, right? People were always, and this happens, right? People are always trying to distract you, like, oh, will you be a consultant? Oh, will you do this or that? Now, I will be honest with you. I took some of those projects because I needed revenue, right? But I also didn't like kind of change course too much from my original focus. So like I was like, okay, let me bring in this revenue. It'll support me for another few months.
Got
And then
some
I'll
mouth
keep
to feed and all that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and then I'll keep building from there. Actually, one of my first clients, it actually might have been my first client was Google, right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
Google back in 2018 was like, "Hey, we like kind of what you're telling us, but we don't need all this stuff you're pitching us. Like, what we need is somebody from the outside to help us build our own mastery courses, our own black belt and blue belt to give us, feedback on
Oh,
what's happening
that
from
was
outside."
you.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I
that
was
was
in
my
Google
fault.
and we all had to do those courses.
Yeah, it
Oh
was my
man.
fault. Actually, if you go back to some of the black belt stuff, you'll see my face and stuff in some of the courses, because I was consulting essentially for Google, and I was like, you know what, great logo to put on my deck. I don't have to
Yeah,
change my pitch. I can just tell people Google's a customer, and I
yeah.
can learn a thing or two from this engagement, and I can feed some mouths for a little while. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Excellent. So as well, something that's always struck me about the way your business is set up and the way you have set up, it looks retrospectively like you were the right person, not to get too Liam Neeson about this, but you were the right person with a particular set of skills that could put this together. And what I mean by that is you knew the product very, very well because you had experience across the world of digital advertising. You had a good range of contacts, having worked across the industry for a long time, and you're a skilled trainer and teacher and educator. And so that combo looks to me like this was just the obvious thing for you to do, and that this was set in stone and bound to be a success. But that's one of those things that looks like it in retrospective. Did you ever see it like that, or did anyone ever say it to you like that?
Um, I think I agree with your retrospective. It feels like it all kind of snapped into place. I think I was a little deliberate about it too, like going into it, where I was like, I want to I want to give myself a shot at success. So what do I love and what am I good at? And like, does it all make sense? Does it work? And so I was a little deliberate about it, but I think that's important, right? Like being deliberate about like, finding what you're good at and then going there, right?
Mm.
Um, it's an interesting question, Brian. I'm actually like kind of I'm actually a little befuddled. Like I don't know. I think that the advice to like new folks starting out is like, yes, think about what you're good at. Think about where you're differentiated. Come up with a plan and a strategy. I also think it's important to be nimble. I think it's also important to recognize like you can't necessarily be good at all the things for a business that you may be wanting to start. And so, how do you find the right support or resources to fill gaps where you have shortcomings, right? Like I'll give you an example. Um, I wasn't great at like building any kind of tech, right? And
Yeah.
so, in the first few years, like the offering was completely divorced from any kind of technology offering, right? And then over time, I brought in folks that could help me on that front. And now we have more of a tech enabled services business, which I always thought was very important for us, right? Even from
Yeah.
day one, but I chose not to focus on it the first few years because I wasn't good at that, right? So,
Right.
um, yeah, but yeah, that's an interesting question, interesting thought.
And I guess as I as the business has matured, and I'm curious now how you're looking at it, because if I'm not mistaken, you built the business very much in the mold that we've spoken about here, where you've got this industry knowledge, you've got these connections, and you've been able to get this point across. And so it's kind of been about the Shiv story under You Have Digital. And I'm curious now, how do you think about scaling that? How do you choose those 8 people that are working at the business, not the individuals, because I know they're all awesome, but like the roles that can build on what you can do, the roles that can say, I'm not so good at that, or I can't spend my time on that. I need someone else to do that. So how do you build beyond just the Shiv story that was the startup?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think ever since like I actually set out initially to ensure I could build something that was scalable and not tied to me, right? So in the beginning, I knew it was absolutely going to be tied to me because I was alone. And so that was okay, but I was always keeping that in mind. And I think over the last, let's say 4 or 5 years, that's like been able to make a lot of progress towards that, right? So if you just kind of compartmentalize, once you have a little bit of a business, you have a proof of concept, you have product market fit, you start compartmentalizing the business into different areas, right? So you're like, okay, what do I, first of all, you compartmentalize your own functions, like what do you do on a regular basis? And then you
Mhm.
take that and you translate it into different functions, right? So, okay, well, a lot of what I was doing was the training, right? So I'm building content, I'm thinking about instructional design. I'm like getting information from people. So how do I turn that into something that is more scalable and replicable? And how do I find people that frankly are like better than me at some of those things, right? And so, and passionate. The passion is very important too, right? Like excited and passionate about it. And so you go out and you find that. You hire for that. Any great entrepreneur's goal is to continuously be firing themselves every year from their job so they can go on and do the next job, right? And this goes back to your question of like, how do you scale? How do you like hire people? Well, you have to have this mentality of like, in a year, the thing that I'm working on right now, I need to fire myself from it and somebody else needs to have that job and I need to move on to the next thing, right? You can't stay stagnant as like the entrepreneur or the founder. You have to keep tackling the next thing and operationalize and scale the thing you are working.
I think that's a really fascinating insight. That's a really tough challenge to set yourself as a business owner to say, whatever I'm doing now either needs to be solved or someone else be doing it in a year's time. That's, that is, that's really high achieving goals. I think, yeah, I think if you were to hold yourself to that, it does make me wonder though, as you talk about, you're obviously having to spend more time thinking about the business, the direction of the business, the management now of seven other people. Do you do you miss being in the groove of actually delivering trainings and designing sessions, etc.?
Yes and no. I mean, like I enjoy doing it, and so I will do it from time to time. I jump in, I moderate or I actually lead as an expert. So I do it from time to time and I can scratch that itch. I will say, like a few years into the business, I was doing it so much that it felt a little exhausting and it became a little bit of a chore. And so, like, I actually really like the balance I have right now. I will also tell you, like, I was saying earlier that, finding my passion was really important with this business. And yes, part of that was teaching and training. I also have another part of me that's very passionate, which is entrepreneurship and building, right? Like, and so when I set out to start this company, I was like, well, one other thing I'm really going to get out of this is this idea of constantly be building. I'm going to be building things all the time. And so I get to build all the time. I'm very lucky that I have an awesome team that can actually run with like most of the training operation, pretty much all of it now, and I can continue to build, right? Continue to fire myself every year and build something new and do something dynamic. So
And
I think I get to strike a good balance.
was that a sense of entrepreneurship that you grew up in with? Did you have like an entrepreneurial background? Was that something that was always there?
Yeah, my family is just all entrepreneurs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my mom, she owned a few like daycare centers when we were growing up, preschools. So she kind of set the tone. Then my dad owned like a laptop repair shop, computer repair shop. Um, my sister also then started to like run a preschool, a bunch of years before I started U of Digital. So all of my family was entrepreneurs. I was the last one. And then, yeah, like I come from, my bloodline or like my family, going back, my
Heritage, as it
grandparents and
were.
stuff. There's a lot of entrepreneurship in my family. So like I just grew up around that environment of like, hey, let's go try something. Let's go build something. Let's buy a
Yeah.
business. Let's roll the dice. And so I have that, just in my DNA.
That's I in one part of our conversation where I think we couldn't be more opposite. I'm from like a one salary civil service background with lots of people, lots of mouths to feed, get that job, keep the salary,
Sure.
don't rock the boat. So all of this has been a big journey and a difference for me over this last 12 to 18 months. But I really like that notion that you say that like you should be pushing yourself out of your current job as quickly as possible. That's a fascinating way. What are you now as you look back over the period that you had? What are you most proud of with what how it has gone?
I mean, it's really hard to be proud. And again, I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs feel this. You go to bed every night freaking out about something or the other, about things that are breaking or the things that are going wrong. You don't sit there and celebrate wins. And so,
Mm.
You're not like, oh, look at all the stuff I achieved. I'm definitely not in that mindset most of the time. But if I try to zoom out, like it's pretty cool. It feels pretty cool to feel like we've helped people, right? Like that at the end of the day, like one of the main metrics we look at is like how many learners have we helped, in the last month or in the last year, right? That's why we started this in the first place is like to help the industry learn, to help individuals further their careers, to help companies drive better outcomes, to help the industry make faster progress. And I think we've like done that to a certain extent. I like when I get little anecdotes from individuals or companies, like, oh, I went into a meeting and I was so much better in this meeting because of your CTV training. Like I was able to talk about the CTV thing so much more confidently, and that helped me close a deal. Like those are the things that make my day, make my week, make my month,
Yeah.
right? Or, a customer telling me like because of your programming last year, like we now feel like we're ahead of the eight ball on like X, Y, and Z product that we've tried to commercialize. And so that's what I'm most proud of, to be honest, is like making the impact like what we set out to do. And so I want more of that. I want to feel more of that. I want more light bulb moments, right? That's what I'm always seeking out. And so I'm going to continue to do that. I'm also proud of like the team we've built. We have an incredible team. Everyone to a T is an A+ player. And it's so like, we have people on our team that are immensely proud of the work they do. And again, like the work we do is helping people learn. Right. And so I'm extremely proud of, I'd say probably like those two things.
Good, good. I would say I understand the entrepreneurial spirit. I understand the tension, the moments where you have to hold your nerve and all that comes with being a business owner. But do try and take a few minutes every now and then and appreciate that, like, you are doing something cool and interesting, and every day is a challenge. Every day is a decision. Every day is something else that falls on you to do and decide upon. And you've done quite a job with this so far. So I think you've got you should appreciate that and give yourself a moment of reflection every now and then.
Thanks,
But
Brian.
listen, before we wrap up, Shiv, I would love, first of all, let's make sure we give a right plug to the business. So tell us who should be looking out for You of Digital and where can they find out more?
Yeah, so if you're in the digital ad industry, and even if you have like let's say 20 years experience, if you're a seller or if you're a buyer, and you have the need to know more, right? To learn more. And maybe that's a personal intellectual curiosity need. Maybe it's because you need that to do your jobs better. Like we want to be able to help you, right? So come to us, come to our website, uof.digital, and check out some of our offerings. Like we have all sorts of different services and touch points and offerings for individuals and then also for large companies and large teams, right? So, and I'd say like the areas that we typically train folks in span, pretty much all things digital advertising. So it's ad tech, it's martech, it's all things programmatic, it's data collaboration and data tools, it's commerce and retail media, which is obviously very hot right now. It's all things emerging formats and channels. So that starts with CTV, but also digital audio, digital out of home, in-game advertising, etc. And then it's obviously all things AI, right? So
Yes.
those are some of the areas we touch. So yeah, if you're interested in learning, please hit us up, find us, send us an email, and we'd love to have a chat.
Nice one. Well, we will have more details on the company site in the podcast notes as well. And the last question that I always ask every guest we have: you had a wonderful, comfortable life in the world of AOL, a wonderful, comfortable life in the world of Criteo, and you decided to go out on your own, not stick to the corporate world, and start a business. Are you happy you did?
Oh, 100%. I would do it 10 out of 10 times. And yeah, absolutely no regrets. I mean, like one thing I say in response to that question is you can either always have a grass is always greener mentality, right? Or you can kind of look at your grass and you can say, well, there's some patches of yellow here and there, but overall, is my grass greener than the other grass, right? Instead of focusing on just the yellow patches. And if the answer to that is yes, you're doing just fine.
Nice one. Appreciate that analogy. All right, Shiv, it's been a real pleasure. It's been a great to talk to you. And again, best of luck with You of Digital on into the future.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Brian. This was a lot of fun.